Okay, welcome back to the Modern Maze. Thank you to Rachel from Planet Critical for joining us today and being the first guest on the podcast. So what an honor. And Rachel, it's glad to have you on here.
Oh gosh, that's so exciting. Guest number one. I am very honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for being here again. I thought maybe it'd just be a good idea to start off with a little background about yourself for myself and for all of the viewers at home.
Sure. Where do you want me to start?
At the beginning, if possible. I'm curious about how your journey began.
God, no, you don't mean at the beginning. I was born in Scotland. So with regards to like the beginning of Planet Critical, I'm getting asked this question quite a bit at the moment, and it's really interesting to see how people respond to it, because I refuse to like ascribe to and perpetuate, this hero narrative, that something was special about me or about my work or whatever. No. That's not at all the case. I mean, I spent my 20s just like, it felt like I was just scrabbling around in the dark looking for my thing. And that's really hard because I really suck at being employed. So I kept having to like change country and change career because essentially my problem was like I would start a thing, be really, really into it. And then once I had kind of like figured out how to do my role, I would get bored. And so, yeah, being like employed, also I don't like being told what to do. So being employed or being managed or having a fixed role, it never really suited me. And also I was really interested in all these things about like justice and kind of economics, and why was the world mad and what could we do about it? And I felt that kind of very youthful, self-righteous responsibility of like, well, I'm going to do something about it, which also it's an attitude that I empathize with. And I love seeing it in young people, but I don't think it is the attitude that particularly gets you anywhere good. So anyway, I lived all over Europe. I did a whole bunch of different things. And I could tell you this story in a way that retroactively makes sense of all my decisions. Like, oh yeah, I was just really always interested in education. Or like, oh yeah, I was just always really interested in learning more about people or justice. Or I was always interested in journalism. No, I was interested in doing whatever it is that I wanted to do in that moment. So I did some journalism. I did some teaching. I ran a publishing house for a while. I did some business. And none of them were quite right and none of them were quite enough. And then just before COVID, I essentially had like a big crash. I was very unwell. I really felt like I'd run out of luck. Like all my ideas had come to naught essentially. And I was panicking and I was like, oh God, everybody else has been spent the last like, I don't know, 6-7 years after graduating, like building something. And I've just been building things and burning them and shit, essentially. And kind of out of I wrote a novel, right, to kind of cope during that really difficult time. And then I tried to sell the novel. And so I was sending it off to agents, and the feedback that I kept getting was like, this is such a beautiful piece of literature, but nobody's going to buy it. And I was like, fuck, can I swear on this?
Of course you can swear. Go for it.
Okay, great. I was like, fuck capitalism, man. Capitalism is broken and it's breaking my life and all my friends' lives. And I want to do something about it. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to launch the world's first sustainable publishing house. And so I spent 6 months working on that. I had the business plan. I had the marketing plan. I had I had it all figured out. And it was very kind of like, now at this stage of my career, I know that it was kind of like very indigenous economics. Like it was about reciprocity and mutuality and all this kind of stuff, and collaboration. But then like, I think it was the day before how old was I? Maybe the day before my 28th birthday, I like burst into tears and was like, I don't want to run a business though. I just don't think it would make me happy. So I canned that. But the one marketing idea I'd had was an other focused podcast called Platform. And so I was like, I literally have nothing else to do and I've totally run out of ideas. So I'm going to do that. And so I started that. And very quickly, I interviewed a woman who is this really amazing investigative journalist who exposed 1MDB, the biggest financial corruption scandal in the history of the world, in which Malaysian elite stole billions from the public through deforesting, the Bornean rainforest. and out of pension funds and all this kind of stuff. And that money went all over the world. It funded Wolf of Wall Street.
Wow.
Leonardo DiCaprio was involved with these guys. Miranda Kerr dated one of them. Her crystal piano got repatriated by the, Washington when they were trying to like scrub up all the money and get it back to the Malaysian people. So I interviewed her about that. And then through that interview, I gradually began working for her. And eventually she made me producer of Radio Free Sarawak, which was the only independent radio news station in Malaysia. And we were producing Indigenous news by Indigenous people with central support from Europe, essentially. And what that meant was we were the only people accurately reporting on the corrupt links between industry and politicians. And also keeping an eye on the fact that the international community was ignoring this corruption because they need the resources that are coming out of Malaysia. And so I was doing that work on the ground, and I was seeing firsthand as well the results of the climate crisis. I mean, I remember I think it was May 2021, there were like 4 flash floods that just washed away entire villages because the soil has been eroded because of all of the deforestation. There's not enough trees. Like the water just comes down and washes everything away, and it completely destroys people's livelihoods, and it really negatively impacts the ecosystem. So I was seeing firsthand the impact of all of that corruption on the local climate and the local people. And then I was also doing this podcast that was about economics and capitalism, and gradually those things came to meet. And I think I'd been doing Planet Critical like 10 months, and I interviewed a guy called Steve Keen on the economics of climate change, and that was it. That was my moment. I rebranded everything. It hadn't been called Planet Critical before that. I rebranded it to Planet Critical, and I branded myself as a climate corruption journalist. And do you know what? It speaks to the power of a brand, because pretty much instantly, people's relationship to the show changed. It took me years before I was making a living out of it, which I think is an important thing to say to people. If you have a passion project, it really has to be a passion. You cannot start it for money. I feel very lucky that I've gotten to a place now where it's my full-time career. But yeah, that's Planet Critical. And now I travel around the world on investigative stories that are sort of self-funded. I speak at conferences on the intersection of the economic, ecological, and energy crises. I interview fascinating people all over the world. And I write these, because of all of the information that I sort of receive constantly from my amazing podcast guests, it's given me this very particular lens on the world, which is a resource lens. And so I'm sort of breaking climate corruption stories with regards to the resource wars that are going on that the media typically don't cover in that way. Because because I'm supported by my subscribers, and, somebody's welcome to come and sue me. I don't have very much. So I hope that, and it's a very, very long answer, I know, but I hope that it does something to dispel the myths of, why people get where they are. It speaks a little bit to how bloody hard it is.
Seriously. No, that was amazing. That was, wow. There's so much in there that I'd love to pick up on. But the last thing, the resource and land grab thing, I saw that you posted something, I think it was yesterday or today maybe, where it was sort of that map of Africa and the Middle East and all the different plays in there. I feel like you should print those in a poster or something. I was zooming in to see all the different little routes of everything. Just, yeah. And yeah.
So that wasn't me. That was on my video about the genocide in Darfur and the links between all these big governments. And one of a woman commented on it when I originally put it up a couple of weeks ago and was like, "Hey, would you mind if I made this into a graphic?" I was like, "Would I mind? Wow. Please go." It's all open source. And she did it, and she put it up yesterday. Wow. And I was the same as you. I was and I messaged her. I was like, "Oh my God, your brain is amazing. I can't believe that you can take all of that and make this. It's stunning." I'm the kind of person that I need to read a thing in order for it to go in. I'm pretty good when I speak to people. That's my second favorite way of receiving information. But for me, I want words on a page. But it's true that for a huge amount of other people, I think it's if I remember correctly from my teaching days, 70+% of people are visual learners. They need that information presented in that way. So I was so grateful to her for taking the time to do that. And it's just, to me, such a wonderful example of our our natural inclination to collaborate. Like, and when you're not proprietorial over information, which nobody should be,
Absolutely.
then really amazing things can come out of it.
Bring back the commons. I love that.
Bring back the commons.
She took that from your podcast and translated it. Like that's, yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
Talented.
Yeah.
So many talented people.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the introduction to yourself. I think you really covered everything, and it's good to hear about your story. I think just watching and reading and, taking note of your subscriber base, it seems like you have such an engaged community behind you. So, it's beautiful to hear the story behind that. And it's like inspirational for me to look at, as someone who's just starting off on this journey. So it's a beautiful platform. And I love reading all the comments under each article, and so insightful. Like people really, it's not just nice article. It's like thoughts, counterpoints, adding to the discussion, which is beautiful.
And they really take care of each other as well. Because I go through them and I read all of them and I like a lot of them, but I don't, how do I put this? I am always very careful about where I am setting the bar with regards to my engagement, because the moment you raise it, that's where you then have to stay. And because of like Planet Critical's growth, like I cannot be in a stage where I'm responding to 100 comments every day. I just don't have the time. And so it's been so heartwarming for me to see everybody else look after everybody else. Like people are, sometimes they write to me, but sometimes they're just like putting out information underneath the piece. And then you see these like dialogues, like a Reddit subthread happening with people like, oh, actually, here's a backup source for what you said, or here's a counterpoint, or can you explain this more to me? And I'm so honored to be the kind of like, to have accidentally created a little public square where everyone else is engaged. I'm so honored. And like really the Planet Critical community every day just amazes me. They are so switched on and so kind and so just, it's such a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful community. And like I see articles and it's just tens and tens of comments, and I feel like it's such an engaged base that you have, which is I guess speaks to the work and the people that you've brought onto your platform.
Thank you. I hope so.
So our first question. Now I know that this is the first question that you ask every guest on your podcast. So I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to ask you, Rachel, why is the world in crisis?
Yes, very good. God, it is a huge question. There are so many different ways to answer this question, which is why I ask it of everybody, and everybody always gives a different answer. And the plurality of the answers is the truth. And so how I answer this question depends on what I'm thinking about on the day. And so I just want to flag, it is not possible to boil it down to like one grand truth. But I suppose with regards to what I'm thinking about at the moment, the world is in crisis because of Homo sapiens' phenomenal cognitive capacity for symbolism and for language, which has disconnected our meaning or our sense of understanding of the biophysical world. And what I mean by that is humankind is so good at transforming things from one thing to another, be that transforming materials like fossil fuels from one thing into a fuel for our civilization, or transforming a cat, like a biological organism, into a symbol of a deity. We are so good at reifying the world around us. And it makes for such an amazing experience to be alive. I'm so grateful to be a Homo sapien and to have this like really meaningful and layered and nuanced relationship with the world. But it does mean often we can't see what's right in front of our noses, because we see what we want to see, or we see the symbolism, we see this other human generated meaning. And so because of that, this kind of like extra meaning / lost in translation. This that we lose a handle on reality, and the reality is that we are overshooting our use of resources, consuming nature, and ourselves and each other, without understanding that we are part of ecosystems, because we've created this kind of like meaningful hierarchy of human supremacy. And if we continue to overshoot resources at the state that we are heading towards a sixth mass extinction event. Even if we stop like dead today, there will still be warming of probably around 2 degrees now. And so the biosphere, the climate, our ecosystems are all unstable. And the world will be in a critical period no matter what, even if we kind of move back from a crisis point. And I think beyond that kind of meaning, language, symbolism, disconnect, I think the reason that capacity drives so much overconsumption is to do with power and the unequal distribution of power, the desire for power, the desire for meaning, beyond what is sort of granted to us by the very miracle of being alive, which is just being alive. I mean, hello. Like, I know we all have kind of a difficult time because of neoliberalism and capitalism and oppression and dominance and all this, like these really rubbish human constructs. But being alive is so amazing, and it is enough, and it should be enough. So yes, I think that our relationship to meaning is why the world is in crisis, which generates from like our cognition, our relationship to symbols, and then our relationship to nature and one another due to power.
Beautiful. That's a powerful answer. I think things that you were speaking about there, I read your article yesterday following your last conversation. I can't remember the gentleman's name,
with
but
Tim.
the Holy Trinity. And I found it really interesting how you had he had the analogy of clouds and comparing the sort of the bigger, denser clouds where it's actually more unequal versus a morning fog where it's sort of dispersed evenly. And if we really want to live within the planetary boundaries, like that, maybe the answer is that all of us have to live at a standard or consuming way less than we're used to, but at an equal rate, as opposed to, billionaires just spending, I don't even know how much they consume compared to somebody living in a slum. I don't even know what the calculation would be of that.
Well, there's no if about that. Like that's for sure. We cannot have such gross wealth and consumption disparity. Millionaires will use up 72% of the carbon budget by 2030.
Wow.
The 1%, it's absolutely wild. And we all need less. Yeah,
absolutely. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the point about symbols and symbology and how you see that in the modern society. How does that manifest itself for you?
Everything. So I think that people go on about like how, and this is certainly like postmodernism, like everything is a human construct, right? So like gender or race, these are symbols that carry other meanings. They're like shorthand essentially for the transmission of cultural knowledge, often incorrect cultural knowledge and prejudice. The relationship to God and ideology, that symbolism. When you look at a forest and you see the potential for profit rather than, the very complex web of life within an ecosystem, that's another symbol. Words are often symbols as well. And we have to work really, really hard to use language in a way that it is reflective or like refractive perhaps of reality, because I think this is part of the problem. Like Ian McGilchrist writes about this. He's a neurophilosopher, and he writes about the fact that he hypothesizes our first language was actually music, and then it was poetry, and then it was prose. And so actually language is meant to be used in this like very meaningful poetic way in which it hints and suggests and allows for uncertainty and allows for meaning and allows for interpretation. And where we've gotten to is really trying to like atomize and accurately describe the world with our words, even though that's kind of impossible to do because the world is so complex. Like each sentence would have to run on forever to accurately grasp what is going on. Yep. And so we've kind of gotten to that stage where like our symbols are then reified. This is I think it was some French philosopher that wrote about this. And reification means like the symbol becomes real in itself. So like when politicians go on about the economy, we've got to protect the economy. Hold on, what? I'm sorry, what is the economy? Exactly. You know, everybody gets so high up to high dough about the economy as if it's a real thing. Whereas actually 100%. An economy is only ever how human beings organize their resources and perhaps their social relationships. That's it. So you don't need to protect the economy. You need to establish how best to distribute those resources amongst people for social cohesion. But the redistribution and the social cohesion has been sacrificed in order to protect the economy, which then gets shorthanded even more to like just economic growth. I'm sorry, what? What are you growing exactly? And what needs to grow unless you know exactly what you're doing it for? And they don't know what they're doing it for. Like the one goal is growth. So that I think is a good example of reification and how symbols become like we forget that they're symbols and they become more real to us than anything else.
Yeah. On the second episode of this podcast, because I wanted to start it in my journey in, I guess, sustainability and getting to this point, for me, it really began when I read Donut Economics. And so I was going through the book again. And one of the bits that resonated with me the most was, forget what chapter it was, but it was all about the rational economic man and how...
Homo economicus.
Yeah, Homo economicus. And I found it so fascinating, like the self-fulfilling prophecy that we have told about ourselves, and then therefore we act in that way as if it's the laws of the universe, right? Like how old is the modern economy? How old are these things? And I often find that with people that I have conversations with, is that the assumption that this is the way that things always were and were always meant to be.
Yeah.
And being stuck in that paradigm.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It's really amazing how short term our memory is as a species. And they've sociologists have studied this. It's called and environmentalists actually. It's called shifting baseline syndrome. And so like whenever people go on about like the new normal, they're talking about a real concept essentially, which is that human beings are so quick to forget how something was and to assume that how things are now is how they've always been. So my favorite example of this is that pre-Reagan and Thatcher's neoliberal reign of the entire world, it feels like, the highest tax band in the United States in the 70s. Yeah, 70s. We're talking like, you know, our parents were like, you know, a generation.
Yeah.
The highest tax band was above 90%. 90 in the United States. And now in the United States, I mean, if you were to even talk about like the minimum being 30, people on both sides of the aisle would freak out. And it's like now built into this, you know, like cultural thing of but you need to free up money in order to generate jobs. And, you know, these people are creating our economies essentially. So they deserve to have their money and it's there and all this kind of stuff and like gets coded into the culture as if it's always been that way. And also like as if everything would crash if we took the taxes up to like 40%. They were at 90, guys. They were at 90 yesterday. The 70s is yesterday. Okay. And people forget. And so it's so important, I think, like, to have to understand our history and to also understand the fact that human beings are so creative and so plural in their nature that there are so many ways that people are organizing themselves differently today. It isn't like this particular culture of neoliberal Western hegemony, and maybe I shouldn't say Western because really what I mean by that is like elite hegemony. There's always been an issue of like there being a ruling class. But that is just one system of organization. And it wins out every time because it's really good at sequestering power. But there are systems of resistance all over the world. Everywhere that there is a liberation front, everywhere that there is a communal project, everywhere that communities like developing mutual aid networks, that is a resistant system. And it just goes to show how many different ways, different possibilities we have for organizing ourselves.
Absolutely. I think for the listeners, it would be great. And for myself, actually, I feel like I'm still catching up on terminologies and the histories. No, it's fine. It's fine. I was wondering if you could explain sort of neoliberalism and maybe like the main ideas that came out from that time. And I guess that are still in today's world.
Sure. So when people talk about capitalism today, I think what we often mean is neoliberalism. And I want to put an asterisk here and say also that neoliberalism is now changing. But essentially, capitalism was the rule of like power, essentially, where like the more that you have, the more that you can make. And that things should not be distributed equally, but things should be distributed by people who are generating things. And that, and then neoliberalism is kind of like this it's this orthodox of like total free markets. So capitalist economists in like the first half of the, even like the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, even these like guys like Adam Smith, they were writing about the market and how the market needs like to space essentially to operate, but none of them thought that it should be totally deregulated. Like all of them said that the market needs to have like some kind of relationship with the state. And then Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman essentially came along and started to meddle with that. And Friedrich Hayek is known as like the kind of godfather of neoliberalism. And he was he was an academic, I think an Austrian guy. And he was writing for years and years and years and years, these like really radical ideas about how the market needed to be totally deregulated, like completely, that you need to get out of its way. And then if you leave it alone, it will make its magic and everything will be fine, essentially. And he was ignored by the academy because his ideas were so radical. And then he created this like Montpellerian society. And I'm telling this story because all ideologies come from a person, right? Like nothing is just born out of nowhere. Like there's human history to all of this.
Yep.
Everything comes out of people's brains. Nothing is written down. Nothing is the word of God, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. So everything can be rewritten and everything can be erased. Anyway, Montpellerian society, he attracted some fans, but people were still kind of ignoring him. There's some story, Naomi Klein writes about this really well. There's a story about the Chicago school. So essentially when the United States was just going around like overthrowing leftist governments in Southern and Central America, they set up this, there was this university set up, I can't remember where it was, in, I think maybe Chile under Pinochet. And they invited these like economists, like Hayek and these economists, be like, yeah, let's just like go. Our economy is your playground. Like just do it. And so neoliberalism is like the total privatization of public good, essentially, and the total deregulation of the market. It didn't work in Chile. It didn't work anywhere where they laid it out, but it does make a very small group of people very, very, very wealthy. And eventually, essentially what happened was Reagan and Thatcher got wind of this. And Hayek became one of Thatcher's advisors. And so the same thing happened in the United States and the United Kingdom, where like the national government is essentially dismantled as much as possible. There is no such thing as society. That was what Thatcher said. And public goods are sold off to the private market under the illusion that the private market will be able to better manage public good because it will be more efficient. And then everything just gets worse for everybody. And wealth floods to the top. Things are only done to protect the bottom line profit. It's just it's like capitalism on steroids essentially. And we are suffering from the impact of the 1980s. I think the 1980s was probably the most important decade last century, because we had seen a huge amount of civil rights progress in the Western world, which I do think was kind of like, how do I say this, funded off of the continued neo-colonial extraction from the majority world. But there was a really strong sense of like workers' power and union power and national economies and public good. And Reagan and Thatcher just totally did away with that. And now we live in a world where we have billionaires. Does that answer your question?
That does answer my question. Yes,
Okay.
yes. And the last point, I mean, my partner and I were talking about the concept of a billionaire the other day, and I can't actually wrap my head around it when I think about how much money that is. I actually just say, what is a billionaire? How can someone be a billionaire? Yeah.
My favorite thing to think about with billionaires is that billionaires could never have existed if we hadn't gotten off of the gold standard, because there wouldn't be enough gold. If money was still tied to gold, there wouldn't be enough gold for there all to be billionaires. Like money had to be totally dematerialized and made into numbers on a screen, because there's literally not enough stuff to like make up billions in a bank vault essentially. So billionaires could only ever exist in this period of history. And until we kind of like rematerialize our economies, and what I mean by that is like ground them in actual fucking reality, we're just going to head towards trillionaires, which I think that's I saw something recently, like we're gonna have our first trillionaire in like the 2030s or something. Mad.
Oh jeez. Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. Makes complete sense when money just it's not tied to anything that's real, just numbers, ones and zeros. Wow. Okay. Wow, well, thank you for that. That was great. I'm going to ask the next question.
Please.
Now, we just spoke, and I think you just spoke about how it's really hard to talk about the crises in the world and pick one thing. But I've been really curious about all of these big conflicts that seem to be happening now. You look at Ukraine, you look at Gaza, Sudan, etc. Do you see anything that's common between what's going on in the world right now?
Yeah, of course. It's resources. To me, my lens is all of this is resource grabbing now. So despite what our sort of like asinine politicians say, there is, and like, you know, the economy and everything's fine and economic growth and whatever, there is a lot of knowledge in the world about just how dangerous a position that we're in. And in particular, the security services, national security services around the world are very, very, very worried about two things. One is climate change. That's the number one threat. And the second is resources, running out of resources. And so let's start with Ukraine. Beyond the politics of like, you know, there was an agreement and then NATO expanded and Putin's, you know, mad and all this kind of stuff. Beyond all of that, Ukraine is the biggest producer of wheat in Europe. I think it produces around 40% of wheat in Europe. It's a huge amount of fertile soil. It has water. It also has fossil fuels. And Putin is essentially expanding into that territory, I think, for resources. And another reason that I'm kind of suggesting that is also the way that he is destabilizing Europe's grip of Africa by deploying the Wagner Group to help with these coups, to overthrow, you know, typically corrupt leaders, and instate new governments. They're often military coups. It's happening in places where there are lots of resources. And it's happening to kind of, destabilize Europe, essentially. Gaza, I mean, there was an agreement, I think it was in 1967, there was an agreement on the borders, and Israel has just expanded and expanded and expanded. There is another side to the argument, which is that Israel perceives itself, or perhaps is, located in a very, very hostile territory with enemies around all sides, and so is big growing in order to protect itself. Again, It's not about the geopolitics here, but it's simply about the fact that there is land. There is land and it wants that land. There's also fossil fuels in Gaza and off of Gaza's coast, $500 billion worth. Israel's been trying to get its hands on those fossil fuels for 30 years. The United Nations wrote a report saying it must be shared with the Palestinians because this is a real opportunity for them to develop their economies, which is fundamentally necessary in the strategy for peace. And Israel, successive right-wing Israeli governments have done everything they can to kill that deal. In Sudan, what we're seeing again is that in quite a dry region, Sudan has a huge amount of arable land and water, which is going to become one of the main resources in the coming decades, if not already. And we're seeing this genocide occur essentially of these African agriculturalists are being genocided by Arab nomads, and the African agriculturalists have stewarded this land and taken care of this land essentially. And they are the reason that this land is so fertile. There's also a huge amount of gold in Darfur and Sudan, more generally speaking, which allegedly propped up the Russian ruble when the West imposed its sanctions when Russia invaded Ukraine. So there's this relationship between the UAE, the forces in Sudan and Russia. And yeah, to me, it's all a big resource grab. Every single state, I think, is aware that we are running out of resources. There's a hard limit to resources, that the New World Order is changing, and that either they need to make new allies or they need to shore themselves up. And so the big, powerful players are trying to shore themselves up. China has been moving into the Pacific Islands and the continent of Africa for decades now. They really just kind of saw this coming. So China controls the supply of materials for a renewable economy, essentially, which I think is one of the reasons why the West is really struggling to transition away from fossil fuels, because fossil fuels is kind of one of the last areas. Not where they dominate. They don't dominate. It's still other countries that dominate, but there's a lot of influence and they have these like allyships essentially. Whereas if you want to still grow your economy, but you've got to do it on renewable energy, you're ensuring the ascent of China and a new world order. So yeah, to me, it's all about resources. And I think you can also look to how this is happening on an individual level. So we're seeing a huge number of very, very wealthy individuals try to shore up resources. So I think Bill Gates is if not the biggest private landowner in the United States. He's spent the past 10 years buying up farmland, essentially. And yeah, there's just moves like that everywhere. So our economies are fueled by resources, whether that be old growth forests or human labor. And there's a finite amount of these resources. Tensions are running high. Rather than collaborate in the most critical decade, I would say, of human history, states are choosing to sort of throw down the gauntlet and fight for these resources. And I think it puts us all in a very, very, very dangerous position.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. I guess the follow-up question that I was going to have was, it really has seemed to me that these conflicts are increasing. But based on what you're saying, it's because these countries and states know that resources are depleting and they're trying to grab their hands full of it as much as they can rather than collaborating, which is, yeah, wow. Yeah,
I would say so.
Yeah.
I think also another reason these conflicts are increasing is that the power dynamics have really changed recently. So you've got a lot of new powerful players essentially in the world that are former colonies. So places that in the past were just this like constant stream of resources out essentially that didn't help the people. But in getting involved in sort of the international market, have managed to develop themselves, and now they want some. So we've got a lot of medium-sized players now which also means that there's going to be more conflict because you can't just go in and take anymore as an old empire, or you're running out of places where you can do that. There's also one more people that I want to highlight actually before your next question that I should have in the first round, and that is the people of West Papua that are experiencing a genocide by the Indonesian military, who colonized them in 62, I believe it was, when the United States essentially offered West Papua to the Indonesians to bribe the Indonesians into the international market. And that was just after the Papuans had negotiated their freedom from their Dutch colonizers. And what's going on there is absolutely atrocious. No journalists are allowed into West Papua. Their population is tiny in comparison to their neighbours in Papua New Guinea. I have seen the most awful, awful footage of Papuans being forced to dig their own shallow graves and then being shot in the head. The military presence in West Papua is absolutely astonishing, and it is because West Papua is an incredibly resource-rich place, and it's just being extracted from. So that's another people I would kind of like to highlight.
Wow. Yeah, I was not aware of that. So thank you for
Nobody
highlighting
is.
that. Yeah. Wow. It's
Nobody
going on
is.
right now. How long has this been going on for?
Since the 60s.
Wow.
So, and in the 60s, when Papua New Guinea got its independence and West Papua didn't get its independence, the population of both was around 800,000 people. Independently. So 800,000 in Papua New Guinea, 800,000 in West Papua. And don't get me wrong, these populations are relatively difficult to establish because they're still very tribal places. You know, there's tribes that haven't been communicated essentially. But that's sort of the understanding. Papua New Guinea's population is now anywhere between 8 to 10 million, and West Papua's population is 2 million. So you can tell how much a people have essentially by their population growth. And there are reports of like essentially apartheid, like these poor Papuans having a different kind of, you know, access to medical care and all of these kinds of things, and just getting kicked out of their land over and over and over and over again because, you know, the Indonesian military wants to come in and deforest or mine or whatever. And again, it's the international community completely turns a blind eye to this because so much is coming out of West Papua. The chairman of the West Papua Liberation movement has, you know, he writes to the UN really, really regularly. He travels as a diplomat, essentially trying to generate attention. And I interviewed him last year, and he was like, this is just pure like neocolonialism. Like nobody will help us because they need what's coming out of our land.
What are the main resources that come out of there?
They have everything. They've got absolutely everything. So they've got loads of rare earth minerals and materials. They've got an abundance of timber, forest. They've got fossil fuels. Like Papua, West Papua and Papua New Guinea is like the third biggest island in the world. It's just above Australia, and it's huge, and it's so rich in resources. It's got some of the most fertile soil in the world. It's also home to like 7% of the world's biodiversity, despite being, you know, it's wild. It's Eden. It's literally Eden. And it's people and its land are at real existential risk.
Wow. I mean, something that I've noticed about Australia and Australians is because we live so far away from so many of these things, it's really easy to not talk about them. But the fact that you're talking about Papua New, like that is really close to us, and I have never heard of this. Like I've never
wild,
heard of this.
isn't
That's
it?
crazy.
Yeah, it's like there is such a kind of cultural gap. So like all of the Pacific Islanders know about this. So I was chatting with some Pacific Islanders just this weekend. They all know, and they're all like politically engaged in it. And then you just like you go literally just down to Australia, and it's totally different. It's crazy. And also just, I mean, while we're on the topic, like the Pacific Islands in general are in total existential risk. the Chinese government has its claws into the Pacific Island. There's so much corruption and bribery in politics. There's that very classic neo-colonial move where they've essentially created like an elite class that are helping and like facilitating the corruption and the extraction from the people, because the Pacific Islands are so rich in resources, because these people have such a different relationship to their environment. They have protected their environment. They have stewarded their environment. Not to romanticize all, like cultures, there's still a lot of violence between tribes, especially in Papua New Guinea. But with regards to nature, like there's a oneness in the relationship. And so these islands are pristine still. They're so rich. Everything is still underneath their soil and in their oceans and in their forests. And they are being just like, the earth is being gouged open and just taken from. And also, like, to be clear, all in the name of economic growth, but also all in the name of renewables. Like, it's gold, it's copper, it's lithium, it's all of the stuff that we need to power our renewable economy. Because without changing our relationship to why we use energy, this thing about how we organize our economies to, like, what is the end goal? Unless we change that relationship, we will just use what is in sight until there's no more left.
100%. When we say we get to 100% renewables, and you spoke to this in your podcast, your latest podcast, and the Holy Trinity, right? Once you reach 100% renewables, then what? With the current mindset, are people going to be okay with stopping at that? Yeah,
I know. Like, I'm so pro renewables, obviously, and I enjoy the idea. Although I was having this conversation with somebody recently. I was like, oh, I love that they could be decentralized. Like you don't need these massive pipelines. You just need like a village could be powered by one wind turbine that they have, paid for themselves, or people can have solar and then they feed into the grid, and it becomes this like reciprocal thing. And I was like, yeah, decentralization, love it. And he was like, yeah, but the supply chain isn't decentralized, the production isn't decentralized, so it's not. And I was like, oh shit, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, no, true. It's complicated. Okay. So still renewables over fossil fuels, but this idea that we will just substitute out one energy source for another and everything will be okay is such like it's logically inconsistent.
100%.
And I remember speaking to a Russian scientist recently. She gave this awesome reframe. She was like, fossil fuels get such a bad rap, but coal saved our forests. So if you look at the rates of deforestation up until the discovery of coal, I mean, that curve is scary. Like, we were going to deforest the entire world. And then we found coal. So the rate of deforestation plateaued. And like, thankfully we still have forest. So this is the thing.
Wow.
That no fuel source is evil. Like, no fuel source is bad in and of itself. It's our relationship to fuel that is the problem. And we've really got to get a grip on it.
Absolutely. I think, in my first episode, I really wanted to highlight, I guess, try and bring out the thinking about looking at different things going on in the world and really trying to critically analyze what it means socially and environmentally. And the example that I actually used was renewables. And I said, renewables, we all think it's great, it's amazing, but here are the ways that if we do not address how we are consuming and producing, and so much of our mindset and relationship with the land and the universe, it's not solving anything. It's creating more problems. We look at, I think the Uyghur region in China is a huge supplier of, I think, polysilicon, or one of the materials in solar panels.
Okay.
I think so. I think that's, just trying to remember that. So I think, really addressing those bigger questions and more existential questions, as opposed to just having a mad rush towards renewables and not caring about how you do it or who suffers in the way, is really something we need to do. Just consciously go about things, not just rush. And I wonder about the media sometimes, because I obviously get climate change, and I'm never going to argue against that. But sometimes some of the ways that I look at sort of mainstream news is almost like fear mongering, which is not wrong. There is a lot going on in the world and a lot wrong going on in the world. But I sometimes wonder about just the state of panic that we're being put into, and that causes us to make decisions like irrationally or not considering the full spectrum of effects and consequences of them.
But are we? Like, is anyone making decisions in halls of power? Like, isn't it that the people who are receiving the message from the mainstream media are just, us, like average punters? Because I get it. I get the whole thing of like whipping people up into a frenzy or a panic is really, really bad. And I think there's probably something to be said with regards to that raising the alarm, then pushing people towards fascism, which is a sense of certainty. And a sense of protection and in-group versus out-group, like very, very basic sort of psychological stuff. But again, apart from that, like going to the polls and that vote, which I'm not sure how much any of that actually counts anymore when we've got so much interference in our elections and all this kind of stuff. I'm not sure. I think it's I think we've got to be really careful not to like overstate how much power we have as individuals. We've only got power as collectives, which is why, a neo-Nazi by himself doesn't mean anything, but a neo-Nazi marching on the street with his 300, fellow neo-Nazis is really dangerous and leads to a political movement. In the same way, people that are really actively concerned about climate change and are educated and are depressed and anxious and frightened because of all this messaging, the only decisions that they can make that are going to have any impact are in a group. And I'm less worried about those people going towards fascism. Like maybe they'll make some bad decisions with regards to like, I don't know. Oh gosh, like what? Oh, my throat. What could they? I don't know actually. Like maybe just like, renewables will save us, whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I'm very protective of the average punter.
No, that's a fair point. I guess for the average punter, like I have a few friends who come up to me and, they share that they're feeling a lot of things and they're feeling anxious about the world and they're worried. And, I've had comments made to me about friends not wanting to have children because they're afraid of bringing them into this world. I guess from your point of view, how does somebody transition from just being a concerned punter into getting into these groups? Like, what does that look like on a local? Is it just local communities and just getting involved as much as you can?
Yeah, I would definitely advise it being local. So like there's lots of great communities online. And if you find your people online, that's wonderful. But there is something about having, your feet on the ground and your hands in the soil with regards to your community. Like it's nice to be in the presence of other bodies. It's nice to have conversations that are face to face. And I think the main psychological medicine for all of those really difficult feelings is empowerment. And sure, maybe you'll feel empowered by engaging in Twitter wars for a while. But the thing that will really help you build up psychological resilience and empowerment is doing things and doing things in the real world. So that can mean, I don't know, setting up a local community garden with your neighbors and growing some fresh fruit and veg. It can mean setting up like a mini sort of lobbying community. So you lobby your community council in order to get things done or change things. Maybe it means running for office. I don't know. But I do think that for everybody's own health, it has to be grounded in reality, like outside of the world of symbols. And so I think that means physically local.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yep. I guess something I was curious about, as a journalist, I was wondering, do you have any tips or tricks for example, if I'm looking into something going on in the world, a current affair, or a topic going on how to sort of cut through the noise, cut through the narratives, and really try to get at the heart of what's going on. Besides subscribing to the Planet Critical, of course.
Oh, well, I mean, subscribe to, if you're in the United States, subscribe to Heated by Emily Atkin. If you're in Canada, subscribe to The Norwal. Also, everything Amy Westervelt does, subscribe to her. So yeah, definitely support your local independent journalists. For me, it's the resource lens. So if something's going on, what's at play? And you find that there literally always is something. There's always something. There's always some deal being negotiated. It's often about resources or materials. And I think that something I've noticed is you can often get the truth by reading. This is going to sound awful, right? This is going to sound awful, but I'm going to say it. There are methods or strategies to being a mainstream journalist. And there is definitely a kind of like reciprocal relationship often between like journalism and government, and towing a party line or kind of acting a little bit as a PR, and not wanting to worry the public. Like the journalism industry really takes it on itself to like not worry the public. And also in places where you've got a really strong legal industry, journalists don't want to get sued. So they will kind of like maybe hint at the thing, and you kind of got to read between the lines in order to understand what's going on. Shout out to the Financial Times. I find that like if you read the Financial Times cover to cover, you get a really clear view of what's going on in the world, but you do have to like know what you're looking for. In other places where like the tradition of journalism is still growing, say, I find that the journalists often say the quiet bit out loud. So I remember in Papua New Guinea when I was there, the security, Lloyd Austin, the United States defense guy, Secretary of Defense, like flew in randomly out of nowhere. He announced he was coming, and 4 hours later he was there. And he gave this like little speech. He had this meeting and he gave this little speech. And it was because Macron was coming in the following day. And so Lloyd Austin wanted to scoop him essentially and like offer something to Papuans, because it was obvious Macron was going to be offering something to the Papuans. And in the local paper, there was like an article about, what Lloyd Austin had said. And then below it, there was another article of, and what was the headline? It was something like, don't worry, not about war with China, essentially. Because he'd offered like naval support for fishing, right? Which again, if you know what you're looking for, you know what that says. But the Papuan journalists would just come up and be like, no, don't worry about it. It's not about China. It's not about war. We're not safe. No, it's not. Like, he promises it's not about China.
Nothing to see here. Move on.
But the fact that they'd said it made it all like it was so. And so I found like, reading the local paper in Papua New Guinea or other like places where, the tradition of journalism is slightly different. It's amazing the stuff that you can get out essentially about what's actually going on in these meetings.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I think in Australia I think I've struggled to find consistent news that I feel like really got to the heart of issues. I feel like often things are quite, subtle, and you almost have to read between the lines. So that's sort of been my experience so far down here. Especially during sort of COVID times is where I really started to notice that shift in the media down here. So that's good. That's a lot of resources for people.
I've thought about like trying to create a course or a show or something about like how to read the news, or even just like a weekly show where it's like, okay, here's like the main stuff. Here's what they say. Here's what it means. Like how to translate the news essentially.
Seriously, I think it's really powerful. especially in today's times, I feel like, with misinformation and narratives and, agendas going on. To me, that's something that I'm always trying to develop and learn is like what is actually going on and how to read the news. And I was looking at a website the other day that I think you have to pay for the full version, but it looks at each website and compares the same news article and tells you if it's sort of left-leaning or right-leaning. I forgot the name of it, but
That's good.
Yeah. But I think things like that, I don't know, like a course by you about, I guess how to read the news and everything. That sounds pretty good to me. I think you'd get a lot of interest.
I've got another one. If anybody's an AI person and they want an AI idea, I think it'd be really cool for somebody to develop a plugin or something. I don't know what the tech word is, but essentially a thing so that when I read an article on my phone or on my computer, it like hovers above people's names and explains how these people are actually connected. So like, like this person has shares actually in this company, or this person has shares in a company that owns a company that owns a company that owns the company that is in this article, like actually revealing the map behind it. Like all of this, like stuff, like really, really critical context to understand why somebody's actually commenting and why they're saying what they're saying.
That would be amazing. Someone could easily make that. Again, with AI, I feel like focusing on the wrong things. And I haven't even listened to your AI episode yet because I saw snippets of it and I feel like I need to prepare myself.
That's really grim.
But I feel like, AI is like this. I don't know. I see it in the same light as renewables where it's kind of, I keep on hearing things about the promise of AI and, will deliver education at a low cost to, areas that need it, which can all be true. But just the way that it's being delivered right now has me worried. But yes. But yes, something like that. Someone who's listening who's good at AI, please, let's do that.
Yeah, please do it. Please
let's
do
get on
it. And if it's successful, I would like 5%.
Yeah.
But generally, just do it. Or even better, just do it, make it open source.
Open source, the commons.
Not profit. Yeah. Anybody listening who has a lot of spare time and could do that, please just
do. Yeah, and credit us.
Yeah, credit us. I'll help with the marketing. I'll do that for free.
One last question from me. And I think we've touched on some really interesting topics today, but I'm just wondering, like, what gives you hope? Is there, are you seeing any shifts in narratives or people or, conversations that you wouldn't have heard 5 years ago? Are you seeing any trends that give you a hope for the future?
Yes, people give me hope, and the world gives me hope, and the sun gives me hope, and being in a forest gives me hope. I think that it's very difficult to comment on global trends because we only ever really see our bubble. And from within my bubble, it looks like the world is about to change, particularly because of what's going on in Gaza. Like, it's utterly unforgivable. And I feel like this has radicalized so many people. Radicalization, though, is not the end goal. That's only the first step. And can we organize well enough? Do we have the resources to organize well enough? Will power actually allow us to organize? Because this is the thing, like, it's all very well kind of shifting between the left and right in a resource-rich world and giving people power and giving them the vote, giving them rights, all that kind of stuff. It's fine when you think you've got enough to go around. But when you don't think that you have enough to go around, I think that our very notion of citizenship is going to be challenged. And certainly, I've heard quite a few people say this. What we are watching unfold in Gaza could happen anywhere. And we should all believe that it could happen anywhere. It could happen to any of us. And if it wasn't Gaza that really frightened you, it should be the overturning of Roe versus Wade that really frightened you. They are going to come for our rights because this is what happens. A system that is built on extraction and exploitation will come and extract from somewhere. And if it cannot extract from the global south anymore, if it cannot extract from people of a different race, or if it cannot extract from a land very far away, it will come and extract from us at home. There's a really interesting book called End Times by Peter Turchin, who was a computer algorithm guy, and him and his team got together to try and study like the end of civilizations. And this is what they found. Civilizations, empires crumble when the ruling class comes home and begins to overexploit from its people. So we are really, really at risk of fascism. I think that is the thing I am most worried about right now, because fascism is frightening. It is absolutely terrifying. It is also the worst. That might be a bit glib, so forgive if somebody can think of a worse one, tell me. But in my mind right now, it is the worst possible political movement to handle a world in crisis, to handle a world of resource scarcity, and to handle a world that is headed towards increasing competition. It is only going to add fuel to the fire. So we're at this stage of like, more people, it feels, are aware of what's going on and want to do something. It's also not last century anymore when doing things felt more possible. You know, we're seeing climate activists being thrown in jail. Climate activists being thrown in jail. At the same time in the United Kingdom as rapists are walking free because our jails are too full. Yeah? So there are really big political decisions being made with regards to how we treat citizens who are daring voice their opposition, protest what is going on, and it should frighten everyone. It's happening in the United Kingdom, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the United States. There's this real draconian push to control and to extract, because Roe versus Wade is nothing more or less than a desire to extract more labor from women and to keep a working class. Like, that's what that is. And it is the first of, I think, probably many rights that they're gonna try to roll back. You asked me about hope, and I understand that this is a very strange answer. but I think that this is like, we really have to know the reality of what we're up against. So whilst more people than ever before are educated, we have a young generation that is totally radicalized. We also have a government that's doing things around the world like banning TikTok. So people are like, you know, TikTok is about to be banned essentially in the United States. It's been banned in New Caledonia by the French as well, right? It's not just that the United States is this big bad guy on the global stage. This is what states do when they are about to lose control. And it's being banned in New Caledonia by the French because it did the same thing. It was radicalizing the youth. It was spreading information about what was actually going on, right? So we need to create decentralized systems of, you know, communication. We need to have our own means of communicating with one another so that they can't be taken away. We need to have our own means of energy so that it can't be taken away. We need to have our own means of voting, essentially, so that it can't be taken away. Like, this is the century where we need to decentralize the fuck out of all of our systems so that we are not vulnerable to movements like fascism, which generate oppression, domination, slavery, hatred, all of these things. I've got so much hope because I love people, and I think people are wonderful, and I think we're creative, and I think we're collaborative, and I think we're loving and caring and beautiful, right? And I don't think that people in charge are evil. I think that people in charge are just taking the decisions that need to be taken of somebody in charge in order to perpetuate the thing. And they are only there because they promised to perpetuate the thing. And if they were to do anything other than perpetuate the thing, they would be immediately replaced anyway. So I think we live in a world where there is actually very little free choice within the existing system, which means the existing system just needs to be totally deconstructed, and it would be better for everybody. All of it is possible. There are communities all around the world who are creating different economic systems, different ways of organizing with each other. You know, these movements of systems of resistance, as I was calling them earlier, they are everywhere. Look at the amount of energy and money that is put into keeping us down. That's another thing that gives me hope. I do not think that this is like a quote unquote natural way for human beings to organize. I think the natural way for human beings to organize is much more collectively, because so much goes into dividing us. So much goes into oppressing us. So much goes into dominating us, because it takes a lot to keep us down, because what we desire to be is on our feet, standing on our feet hand in hand. All of that gives me hope, but we have to know what we're up against, and we have to know that it's going to be difficult. And I also think we have to know that coming out of the other side, it's not going to be some, you know, like high tech, libertarian, no work society. It's going to be low energy, low material footprint, much less travel, much less, consumerism, less of a lot of things that don't benefit us, I would say, apart from travel. Which I will be sad to see go, but I guess I don't know, get a horse, learn to ride it. I don't know. But it will be better. And this is something that Tim said in the episode that you referenced, the cloud one. It may be possible. It may only be possible that we have a socially just world and a low energy world. And I'm starting to think that that's the case. And I'm starting to think that that would still be a very, very, very beautiful world. And so that it all gives me hope. But there's no point in having hope if you're not educated. That's the lazy way out. So get educated, get hopeful, get educated.
That was fucking beautiful. I got chills. I got a bit of a shiver there. It's like a call to action. It's like 10 o'clock at night and I'm ready to jump out and fucking, yeah.
Come and get involved.
Organized.
It's so much more fun on this side.
Come
and get involved.
100%. Just get involved. Get involved. Wow. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for your
you.
time today. Seriously. I was very, very honored. I mean, first, even just to reply to my message and to jump on. It's been amazing. And I absolutely love all of your content. I think you're doing a beautiful thing for this world, and you'll have a supporter in me. And for all of my listeners, please check out Planet Critical on all the streaming platforms and as well on Substack, where you can find Rachel's writing.
Thank you so, so much. It's been such a joy speaking with you today. Congratulations as well on the Modern Maze. Keep going, keep trucking. It's so important. The more people talking and sharing and listening, the better this world will be. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.